The table was set like an altar. Fine china, candles lit, and a silence that didn't fit the occasion. It was the Families Getting to Know Each Other dinner, hosted by Regina Prado, my son Eduardo's other mother-in-law. I was late, 20 minutes to be exact. I came straight from the hospital, where a young patient had called me Mom before surgery. Maybe that's why time moved differently for me. When I walked in, every head turned. Regina, wearing a rehearsed smile, said loud enough for the room, "Around here, we're punctual, you know. Manners are learned at home." The room laughed. But Eduardo, my son, didn't. I saw that look, the one only a mother recognizes, the look of someone who loves two women and suffers in silence because of it. I sat quietly. Not out of submission, but strategy. I've learned that in certain rooms, silence is the most elegant form of self-preservation. As the silverware chimed, my chest tightened, not from shame, but from memory. I remembered how hard I fought so my son would have what I never did, respect. And I realized the woman across from me confused luxury with worth. I glanced at the watch on my wrist, a gift from Eduardo the day he got into college. And I thought, if she only knew how many lives this delay has helped save. But I let it go. Time, after all, has its own methods. If you've ever been disrespected by someone who should have welcomed you, stay with me, because this story is for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Dinner carried on as if nothing had happened. But the air, heavy, saturated with vanity, gave away everything words refused to say. Regina spoke loudly, gestured theatrically, and smiled too much. The kind of smile that tries to convince the world of a confidence that isn't there. "I always say," she began, lifting her wine glass, "a woman's worth shows in how she presents herself." A theatrical pause. Unfortunately, some still haven't learned that. The giggles came back. Eduardo glanced at me, anxious. I simply adjusted the napkin on my lap and smiled with the calm that only comes to those who've survived much worse. I looked at her and answered in a neutral tone, "You're right, Regina. The way we present ourselves says everything about us." She nodded, satisfied, until I added, "Especially when appearances are the only asset left." Silence shattered like glass. Even the silverware stopped. Camilla, my daughter-in-law, hit a cough. But I kept my gaze steady, without hostility. Just truth. Eduardo held my hand under the table. A small gesture with enormous meaning. It was my son returning to the boy who knew who I was, even when the world forgot. Regina tried to laugh, but her voice cracked. "Oh, my dear, don't take everything so seriously." "Don't worry," I replied, soft. "Time has already handled the teaching." She looked away. And I realized that behind the flawless makeup, there was fear. Not of me, but of what I represented. A woman who had nothing to prove. That night, I understood that some battles are won simply by staying seated. And that silence, when firm, speaks louder than any toast. After that night, I realized some people mistake kindness for weakness. Regina Prado was one of them. She believed politeness meant submission, and that silence meant fear. She had no idea my silence was armor. The following Sunday, we were all invited to a lunch at her house. Family reunion, she called it, always surrounded by adjectives and appearances. I arrived on time. Regina looked surprised. "Oh, such punctuality," she said with that sweet venom only certain women master. I smiled. I've learned over time, some occasions don't deserve to be late. This time, Eduardo greeted me with a tight hug. He was trying, and I saw it. The same boy who once promised he'd never let anyone make me feel small. During lunch, the conversation revolved around trips, luxury cars, and designer labels, topics that drain life out of any room. Until Regina commented, "Oh, if only I had access to certain international business contacts." She looked at me, smirking. "But of course, each of us lives in our own little world, right, Clara?" I smiled calmly. "Yes, Regina, each in her own world. Mine, for example, is pretty busy finalizing an international hospital expansion deal." She laughed, dismissive. "Oh, sure. A charity hospital, I assume. Before I could respond, Eduardo cut in. Mom, please don't say that. You know Dr. Clara's work is serious. She glared at him but fell silent. Then one of the guests, a well-known businessman, spoke up casually. Dr. Clara Montero? Are you the president of the Vita Nova Group? The table went still. Regina's eyes widened. Excuse me, what? The man continued, impressed. Your project's been talked about in Europe. Congratulations, it's an inspiration to all of us. I smiled modestly. Thank you, I just try to do my part. Silence. And then I understood. The most elegant power is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. Regina tried to recover. My goodness, what? A coincidence. I had no idea. Understandable, I said. Some people only see what shines on the surface. Eduardo stifled a laugh. Camilla looked down, and I just kept eating, peacefully, because in that instant, the tables had turned, and no one noticed. The simple woman she'd tried to belittle was, in fact, the quiet force behind much of what upheld the very status she worshipped. But it wasn't the moment to reveal everything. Destiny likes to watch before it acts. And that evening, I decided to let it enjoy the show. After that lunch, something changed. Regina began to act differently, more restrained in her words, but with the same evaluative gaze of someone who measures others by the label on their clothes. She was the kind of woman who only felt safe when someone else felt small. A few weeks later, we were invited to a charity dinner at the country club where she hosted her so-called benefit events. A social gesture on the surface, but deep down, I knew it would be a stage. And she, of course, the leading actress. The ballroom was immaculate. Marble walls, French champagne, discreet orchestra. Eduardo and Camilla arrived with me. As soon as Regina saw me, she spread her arms in fake warmth. What an honor to have you here, Clara. I hope you feel comfortable. I always do, I replied calmly. Wherever there's good manners, the atmosphere is pleasant. She laughed, brittle like glass about to crack. During dinner, she pretended courtesy but couldn't resist the temptation. You know, everyone, she said, raising her glass, I truly admire people who have the courage to reinvent themselves, especially those who come from humble beginnings. It's inspiring. Some guests chuckled, others shifted awkwardly. She pretended not to notice. Eduardo froze, as if his blood had stopped circulating. I just took a deep breath. You're right, Regina, I said. It takes courage to rise, but it takes character to stay there. The room fell silent. The kind of silence that has a sound, the sound of secondhand embarrassment. She tried to laugh, nervous. Oh, don't take it the wrong way, dear. I only meant to compliment you. And I only meant to return the favor, I said, meeting her eyes. Camilla squeezed Eduardo's arm under the table, asking him to stay calm, but he couldn't. Mom, please stop. Don't you realize you're being cruel? Regina froze. That word, cruel, cracked through the air like a whip. And for the first time, she felt the sting of being confronted by her own son. I touched his hand and whispered, Let it be. Sometimes silence corrects better than shouting. She stood up, trying to maintain her composure. I apologize if I was misunderstood, but the damage was done, and the looks around the table said it all. Her mask had begun to crack. I stood as well, raised my glass, and said, A toast to women who can rise without stepping on anyone. Polite applause. Respectful glances. The scene ended, but its echo lingered. That night, as we left the hall, Eduardo hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, Mom. For her, for everything. Don't blame yourself, my son. Destiny has its own way of teaching what love couldn't. I looked back. Regina stood alone in the center of the room, a trembling glass in her hand. For the first time, her vanity had a bitter taste. The morning after the dinner, I woke up early, as always. There was no bitterness, no sadness, just that quiet feeling that something important was about to unfold. When destiny moves, Even the air feels different. I brewed my coffee, sat at the table, and glanced at my phone. Missed calls, messages, notifications. A world too impatient for someone who's learned to wait. Among the calls was a familiar name, Dr. Renato Vasquez, my legal advisor and trusted friend for over 20 years. I answered. Clara, I've got news. The board approved the deal with the international group. We're talking $3 billion in investment. The announcement will be made this afternoon. I smiled. Congratulations to everyone, Renato, and to Destiny, for its perfect timing. He laughed, unaware of the irony. After hanging up, I looked out the window. The sunlight poured over the city with that golden tone that always comes before a turning point. A short while later, the phone rang again. It was Eduardo. Mom, have you seen the news? The Montero Group is taking over the management of the state's health foundations. I've seen it, my son. The Prado Family Foundation. It's on the list, too. I paused for a moment. Then I guess it's time to reconsider what we call coincidence. There was silence on the other end. Eduardo knew my words carried more than one meaning. He also knew I would never be cruel, but that time itself had a merciless sense of humor. Later, as I reviewed reports, one last call came through. The voice was trembling. Dr. Clara, this is the Minister of Health's office. We'd like to confirm your attendance at tomorrow's press conference. Confirmed, and thank you for the invitation. After I hung up, I closed my eyes for a moment. I felt a kind of peace that can't be bought. It was the prelude to justice, the kind that doesn't need a courtroom, only timing. At that same moment, Regina was in a meeting with investors, speaking confidently, until someone entered the room holding a tablet. Mrs. Prado, have you seen the announcement from the Montero Group? She looked at the screen, and for the first time, the color drained from her face. Meanwhile, I was at my office signing the final documents. Renato looked at me with a subtle smile. You know, Clara, it's fascinating. You always win without ever raising your voice. That's because the voice of truth doesn't need to be loud, Renato, just heard at the right time. The phone rang once more. It was Eduardo. Mom, I think Regina's in shock. She finally found out who you really are. Then Destiny did what I never had to. And that morning, I understood something. Life never forgets an address. It just waits for the perfect moment to deliver what's due. While I carried on with my day in peace across town, Regina Prado sat at the head of a long boardroom table at the institute she presided over. Her assistant opened a folder filled with charts and contracts. Everything seemed fine, until someone interrupted. Mrs. Prado, the new hospital management contract has been announced. She smiled, confident. Wonderful. Must be another deal with the Vita Nova Group, right? The man hesitated. Yes, but the Vita Nova Group now belongs to the Montero conglomerate. Regina laughed, confused. Montero? You don't mean the same name as that doctor? He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen, a headline in bold letters read, Clara Montero takes over as CEO of the country's largest hospital network. Her laugh died in her throat. The blood drained from her face. The room began to spin. Ottavio, her husband, noticed. Regina? What's wrong? Nothing. Just a bit lightheaded. But that lightheadedness had a name, a surname, and a kind of elegance that didn't forgive. She rushed to the bathroom and faced the mirror. The flawless makeup now looked like a cracked mask. She stared at herself, and for the first time, saw a small woman surrounded by titles and emptiness. Then, like a flash, a memory hit her. She was 17 when, at a school dance, she mocked a poor classmate for wearing the same dress twice. Years later, that same classmate became a doctor and saved Regina's mother's life. But she never apologized. The past at last was charging interest. In that mirror, Regina finally understood. Time doesn't humiliate. It just returns what's owed. Outside, her staff whispered, She must be devastated. Rumor has it the new group will review all her contracts. And that Dr. Clara Montero already has full control. Regina went back to the table, pale, trying to hold herself together. But the performance was over. Meanwhile, I was in my office signing reports. Dr. Renato walked in with a discreet smile. "The news is everywhere, Clara. The city's talking about it. Let them talk. Truth, when it arrives, doesn't need defense." Moments later, Eduardo entered, looking worried. "Mom, she's shaken. Said it was a shock to find out like this." "Son, I told you. Time is the strictest teacher there is. It teaches even those who think they already know everything." Eduardo lowered his head, emotional. "I'm sorry for letting her treat you that way." "You didn't let her, my love. You gave me time. Time to show who I am." He hugged me, and in that quiet embrace, I realized the real victory wasn't seeing her fall. It was seeing my son understand the value of dignity. That night, Regina couldn't sleep. Her face, drained of color, reflected the end of an empire built on appearances, and the silence now was hers. Wounded pride is like shattered crystal. You can glue it back together, but it never shines the same. And Regina, desperate to restore hers, organized another gala, a charity event at the same club where she'd once tried to humiliate me months before. She invited the press, politicians, and business leaders, and even added a touch of false generosity in her invitation. "Clara, I'd love for you to join us. It's time to show unity between our families." I accepted. Not out of vanity, but because some lessons deserve an audience. When I arrived, the ballroom was dazzling. Everything sparkled, except her eyes. I greeted everyone with the serenity of someone who'd already won without needing to prove it. Regina approached me with a rehearsed smile. "Clara, what a pleasure to have you here." "The pleasure's all mine. I suppose fate wanted us to share the same stage again." The guests exchanged glances. Across the room, Eduardo watched me with a tight chest. He knew this night would be remembered. After dinner, Regina climbed onto the stage. She spoke loudly, gesturing gracefully, trying to look confident. "I'd like to toast all the strong women who inspire us, and my dear consuegra, who teaches me so much about patience." Some laughed, others looked away. She raised her glass, sure she had regained control. But destiny, as always, knows perfect timing. I stood slowly, walked to the center of the room, and asked for the microphone. Regina is right. Women do inspire, especially those who've learned that time reveals what pride tries to hide. The room went silent. She tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed the fear. I continued. "So tonight, I'd like to propose my own toast. Not to the past, nor to appearances, but to the elegance of those who learn to respect after making mistakes." I raised my glass. The orchestra stopped. The sound of crystal echoed like a verdict. Regina lowered her glass. A flush spread across her cheeks. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own reflection. Eduardo stood and began to applaud. Camilla followed. Soon, the entire room rose in applause. Regina took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "You are remarkable, Clara." "No, Regina. I just learned I have nothing left to prove." The photographer captured the moment. 2 women, 1 silent victory. The next morning's headline read, "Charity Gala becomes a symbol of grace and redemption. Clara Montero steals the spotlight." I didn't say another word. Once again, time spoke for me. The ballroom still echoed with applause when Regina vanished down the hallways of the club. She walked fast, tripping on her gown, desperate to escape the sound that now followed her like mockery. The bathroom door slammed shut behind her with a dry thud. She leaned against the sink, breathing hard. The mirror before her reflected a flawless woman, but only on the outside. Her makeup was perfect, her necklace sparkled, her hair immaculate. But her eyes no longer obeyed her. Cold water ran through her trembling hands. She stared at her reflection for a long time, trying to recognize the woman looking back. The woman in the mirror didn't smile. Her gaze was hollow, tired, the kind that only appears when the soul has already surrendered. Then, the past came rushing back like an old movie reel. Regina remembered her mother, a humble seamstress with calloused hands who used to say, "Sweetheart, treat well those who make you feel small. They're the ones who'll test the size of your character." But she never listened. She thought kindness was weakness. And she spent her life trying to prove she wasn't the seamstress's daughter, but the businessman's wife. The last name became her armor and her prison. Now, in that luxurious bathroom, it all seemed absurd. The mirror didn't care about titles or jewels. It only reflected the emptiness. She opened her purse, looking for a tissue, but found an old note instead. A hospital flyer. Donation campaign, led by Dr. Clara Montero. The irony made her laugh, a short, painful laugh. The woman she once tried to erase now seemed to be everywhere. Outside, female voices whispered, "Did you see that toast?" Clara was flawless. The other one looked crushed. Regina rested her forehead against the mirror, eyes filling with tears. She wasn't crying out of anger, but out of recognition. For the first time, she realized it wasn't Clara who humiliated her. It was her own conscience. Meanwhile, in the ballroom, Eduardo looked for her. Camila stopped him. "Let her be, love. Sometimes silence has to do the teaching on its own." In the bathroom, Regina wiped off her lipstick, removed her earrings, and stared at her bare face. No characters, no masks. And there she saw, at last, the woman her mother once tried to save from pride. "How did I let this happen?" she whispered to the mirror. But mirrors never answer. They only return who we are once we stop pretending. She washed her face, straightened her posture, and looked at herself firmly. In that moment, she wasn't the haughty woman of the galas anymore, just a tired woman trying to begin again. She left the bathroom in silence. No one called her, no one waited. And maybe, for the first time, that felt right. Across town, I, Clara, watched the Foundation's press conference on TV. Cameras showed new contracts, future partnerships. But what I really saw was something greater. Destiny's mirror realigning itself. Because sometimes, life is like that. A ballroom and a bathroom. On one side, appearance. On the other, truth. And whoever has the courage to face themselves wins, even without applause. A few days after the event, a thick white envelope was left at the front desk of my building. Heavy paper, gold lettering, the sender, Regina Prado. I smiled before even opening it. Time is funny, it always gives back, but rarely in the way we expect. Inside was a lavish invitation. Charity gala dinner in support of the City Lights Foundation. And a handwritten note. "Clara, I'd love for you to attend. Perhaps we can meet again on better terms. With regard, Regina." The handwriting was elegant but shaky. I placed the card on my desk beside a pile of reports and watched the contrast for a moment. The glossy paper of appearances beside the documents of real change. Then I called Dr. Renato. "Renato, is the Prado Foundation still a partner in the public health program?" "For now, yes, but audits are underway." "Then I'd better not attend this dinner. I prefer to bring ethics to the table with me." He laughed softly. "Always wise, Clara." That night I wrote a simple reply. "Dear Regina, thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, I'll be in a meeting with the Minister of Finance. He insisted on the time. Wishing you a good event and a moment of reflection. Clara Montero." I folded the letter neatly, sealed it, and had it delivered the next morning. Later that evening, Eduardo stopped by unexpectedly. His eyes had that hesitant look of someone who wants to speak but fears what he'll hear. "Mom, Regina's trying to change. Really. She asked me to reach out. Son, change is beautiful when it comes from awareness, not from fear. She said she admires you. Admiration without remorse is just vanity in disguise." He fell silent. I sat beside him and took his hand. "I don't want you torn between two worlds, my love. I just want you to understand the value of respect. Because when respect leaves, love goes with it." His eyes filled with tears. "I understand, Mom. I think now she does too." I smiled. Then time has done its job, and we can move on without needing to defeat anyone. The next day, Regina received my letter amid the dinner preparations. When she read it, she swallowed hard. The word reflection stung deeper than any insult could. Still, the party went on. Champagne, orchestra, lights. But what she didn't expect was that half the guests wouldn't show up, because they were all watching the live broadcast of the Montero Duarte Foundation's press conference. On screen, I was giving a speech. A woman's true elegance lies in how she reacts when the world tries to diminish her. Applause, and silence on the other side. Regina turned off the TV and stared once again into a mirror. But this time, there was no anger. Only a strange kind of bittersweet admiration. She finally understood. Some people aren't punished by destiny. They're simply forced to watch. Autumn arrived with that wind that smells like change. I was walking up the steps of the new Women's Support Center when I saw the workers fastening the bronze plaque by the entrance. The sun hit it directly, and for a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. Montero Duarte Foundation, an initiative by Clara Montero. I ran my hand over the cool metal and felt something different. Not pride, but gratitude. Gratitude for everything I had to go through to stand there. Across town, newspapers blared the headline, "Opening of the country's largest women's support center." And beneath it, historic partnership with Vida Nova Group, led by Clara Montero. The cameras arrived early. The main hall was filled. Volunteers, doctors, officials, ordinary women, all united by one word: dignity. Eduardo showed up late, his jacket wrinkled, his eyes teary. "Mom, it's beautiful. You did it." "We did it, son. No one wins alone." Regina showed up too. Quietly, without announcement. She wore a dark suit and carried a small bouquet of lilies. She looked smaller, not in stature, but in ego. When our eyes met, she simply nodded, sincerely. The ceremony began. The mayor gave a formal speech, reporters took notes, and I waited for my turn. When I stepped up to the podium, I said, "When a woman is humiliated, they say she should stay silent. But I've learned that silence can also build, brick by brick, until it becomes shelter for others." Applause erupted. Some women were crying. Regina among them. I continued. "Today, I give back to society what pain once taught me. That respect is more valuable than any inheritance, and that dignity, when lost, can be rebuilt, as long as truth is the cement." The applause grew louder, echoing through the freshly painted walls. Eduardo filmed from the front row, eyes shining. Camilla held his hand, 2 generations once divided, now united. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Regina approached slowly. "Clara, the name on that plaque is well-deserved. Congratulations." "Thank you, Regina. Time is a patient sculptor. And cruel sometimes. Only with those who challenge it." She handed me the bouquet and smiled, tired but sincere. "I brought flowers, not to apologize, but to thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. I just let destiny do its job. It always works cleaner than we do." Regina laughed softly, a light, human laugh, maybe the first real one in years. When she walked away, I looked again at the plaque. The bronze reflected the sunlight, and for a moment, I saw my mother's face in the shimmer. The woman who taught me never to repay pain with hatred. I felt peace. Because in that piece of metal, more than a name, was proof that love, when it survives humiliation, becomes a monument. In the days following the inauguration, the name Clara Montero appeared everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, TV shows. Not as part of a scandal, but as a symbol of grace, resilience, and purpose. Meanwhile, Regina disappeared for a while. Some said she'd gone to care for her ailing mother. Others, that she'd retreated to rethink her life. I didn't ask. I'd learned that some absences are blessings in disguise. One morning, I received an unexpected call. It was a journalist. "Dr. Clara, Did you know the Prado Foundation is closing down? I didn't. But I imagine time has finished its accounting. Silence on the line. And what message would you like to leave about that? The same as always. When your purpose is vanity, bankruptcy is only a matter of calendar. I hung up and went back to my work. On my desk were stacks of reports, letters from women who had found shelter in the foundation, and photos of rebuilt families. That was the real profit. The kind you don't measure in numbers, but in lives changed. That afternoon, Eduardo stopped by. His face was calm, but his eyes revealed something deeper. Mom, Regina wants to see you. She says she won't rest until she speaks to you in person. Then tell her to come. I don't owe anyone silence, but I also never refuse forgiveness. A few hours later, she arrived. No jewelry, no makeup. Just a simple scarf and a weary look. She sat in front of me, silent for a long time. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Clara, I judged you. I belittled you. And now I realize what I envied most was something I could never buy. Peace." Her sincerity disarmed me. For a moment, I didn't see the arrogant woman from the galas, but a soul trying to rebuild itself. "Regina," I said softly, "life is generous with those who learn, and cruel with those who pretend they have." She nodded, tears welling up. "I want to start over, not to clean my name, but to recognize myself again." I smiled. "Then you already have." She cried quietly. There were no speeches, no formal forgiveness, just two women, face to face, realizing that pain, when accepted, teaches. Before leaving, she looked at me and said, "You could have destroyed me, Clara, but you didn't. That's what broke me the most." It wasn't inaction, Regina. It was choice. Vengeance feeds the ego. Peace feeds the soul. She smiled, exhausted, and walked away. Her perfume lingered, along with a sense that the story had finally come full circle. I went to the window. The sky was golden. The curtains swayed with a new kind of lightness. I thought of how many times I'd wished for justice, only to discover that the harshest punishment is regret. Vengeance is a dish that cools quickly, but forgiveness, when silent, warms forever. Days after that encounter, Regina asked to see me again. This time, not in my office or at any event. She wanted to meet for coffee. "No stage, no spotlight," she said. I agreed. Maybe because maturity teaches you that some stories deserve a quiet ending, not applause. We met at an old cafe downtown. The place was calm, filled with the smell of fresh bread and soft jazz drifting through the air. The light came through the windows in that tender way that makes time slow down. When she arrived, I noticed she'd changed. Not in clothes or hair, but in her eyes. There was weariness, yes, but also serenity. The kind that comes only after you stop fearing the fall. She sat down, adjusted her scarf, and began. "Clara, it took me a long time to understand what you've always known. That respect is worth more than gold, and pride. Pride is the worst investment a woman can make." I smiled. Pride is a luxury the conscience can't afford for long, Regina. She took a deep breath, hesitated for a moment, and confessed. "For years, I lived just to be seen. And you? You always were. Even in silence. Being seen isn't an achievement. Being remembered with respect, that's the real victory." She lowered her eyes. "You know what hurt me the most, Clara? Realizing that while I was busy trying to be admired, you were busy being useful." Her words struck me. Not out of vanity, but because I knew how much truth they carried. Time is a patient teacher, Regina, and pain is its most effective assistant. She laughed softly through her tears. "You should write a book. Call it How to Win Without Fighting." "No, dear. I just learned that silence isn't the absence of an answer. It's a kind of answer the impatient can't understand." We stayed quiet for a while. The waiter brought the coffee, and its aroma filled the air like a memory of peace. She lifted her cup, and for the first time our toast was sincere. No irony. No masks. Just two women who had lived long enough to understand that life doesn't need an audience to have meaning. You know, Clara, I think what I envied most in you was your peace. Peace doesn't come free, Regina. It's paid for in monthly installments of letting go. She laughed again, wiped her tears, and looked at me tenderly. Thank you for not hating me. Hate is a prison, Regina, and I've learned never to live anywhere that steals my freedom. We said goodbye with a short but genuine hug, the kind that closes chapters cleanly. As she walked away, I felt the weight of the past few months finally lift from my shoulders. Justice had been served, not by courts, but by the heart. And there, in that modest little cafe, I understood something simple yet profound. It was no longer about victory. It was about closure. A few days later, Eduardo called me. Mom, Regina's a different person. She said she's volunteering at the foundation now. Then destiny gave her the gift every woman deserves, a new beginning. I looked out the window. The sun was setting, tinting the sky gold. And I thought, sometimes the greatest miracle in life is seeing remorse turn into love. Time passed quickly after that conversation with Regina. The foundation grew. New branches, new partners, new dreams. My name, once whispered at dinner tables of pretense, was now spoken in state meetings and international conferences. But none of that dazzled me. My greatest joy was walking the hallways and watching women rebuild their lives. That week, Dr. Renato called. Clara, we need to discuss a new investment. It's big and delicate. Delicate how? The Prado Group has submitted a partnership proposal. I smiled, not surprised. Destiny really does have a sense of irony. Send the report to my desk, Renato, and let them know I'll attend the meeting myself. 2 days later, I entered the main conference room at Montero headquarters. The glass walls reflected the entire city, the perfect metaphor for transparency. The table was long, polished, lined with folders, laptops, and expectant faces. Eduardo sat beside me. Camilla was behind him, representing the foundation. And across the table, side by side, sat Regina and Otavio Prado. She looked up as I walked in. There was no hostility in her eyes, only respect, genuine, earned. Mrs. Montero, it's an honor to have you here, Otavio began formally. The honor is mine, I replied. Time has a funny way of reintroducing people in different versions of themselves. I sat down. The meeting began. The numbers were promising, the projections well designed. But what lingered in the air was something else, an old story asking to be closed. Regina presented part of the project. Her voice was steady but humble. Our group believes that uniting forces is always the right path. There's no glory in starting over alone, only in rebuilding with humility. I looked at her. The words were real. In that moment, I realized the woman in front of me no longer sought applause, she sought purpose. When she finished, I spoke. The project is solid, but before we discuss numbers, I'd like to talk about principles. Everyone leaned in slightly. For a long time, I've seen people confuse power with entitlement. I've learned the hard way that no investment prospers where respect is missing. Eduardo looked at me with pride. Camila squeezed his hand. I continued. That's why I'll be clear. Any partnership with the Montero Duarte Foundation must reflect human values, not just financial ones. Capital can build walls, but only ethics can build legacies. Silence filled the room. The investors nodded, taking notes. Regina's eyes glistened. Otavio cleared his throat. Then, you're saying you accept the proposal? I smiled. I do, but with one condition. Anything. I picked up my pen, signed the contract, and added a single line at the bottom. This partnership shall remain valid as long as respect is the language between us. I slid the document across the table and looked straight at Regina. It's just a symbolic clause, but I think we all understand the weight of that word now. She smiled through her tears. I understand better than ever, Clara. And I'll never forget it again. We signed. The room erupted in applause, But what touched me wasn't the sound. It was her expression, grateful, calm, human. As everyone stood, Regina came closer. "Clara, you've given back what time took from me, the chance to become better." "Regina, life doesn't take anything. It only gives back what we hand it." She nodded, deeply moved. Eduardo hugged us both. 3 generations bound by lessons learned the hard way. As I left the room, I looked out at the city. It pulsed, alive. Cars honking, people rushing, life moving on. But inside me, for the first time, time itself was still. I finally understood. Vengeance isn't about making someone fall. It's about moving forward with dignity and letting them learn to walk on their own. And in that moment, I was no longer the woman humiliated at a dinner of appearances. I was the woman who proved, with silence and grace, that true power isn't measured in wealth or status. It's in standing tall when everyone expects you to break. Several months passed after that meeting. The partnership with the Prado Group thrived, and Regina now worked as a volunteer director at the Montero Duarte Foundation. Seeing her name next to mine in the reports was a quiet reminder that respect, once it finally blooms, can transform even the driest soil. But inside me, something new was growing. An old desire to close a chapter, not with words or contracts, but with legacy. One autumn morning, I asked Dr. Renato to come to my office. He arrived, smiling, carrying his usual folder. "What are you planning this time, Clara?" "One final investment, not in companies, in people." I opened the safe and handed him a stack of documents. "Here it is, properties, shares, assets. I want to turn it all into a lifetime donation. The foundation will care for elderly women abandoned by their families. None of them will die forgotten." Renato looked at me, deeply moved. "Are you sure? It's an incalculable fortune." "I'm sure. Wealth only makes sense when it restores someone's dignity." I signed the will and closed the folder. The metallic click of the lock sounded like an exhale, as if each signature erased an old scar. The next day, I called a press conference. Cameras filled the foundation's main hall. Eduardo and Camila sat in the front row, pride in their eyes. Regina, quietly in the corner, smiling sincerely. I stepped up to the podium and said, "Today, I officially leave my estate to the Montero Duarte Foundation. What was once mine now belongs to every woman who was ever made invisible. Because those who've been forgotten know better than anyone the value of being remembered." The audience rose in applause. Some women wept openly. Eduardo held Camila's hand, both visibly moved. I continued. "They say time heals. I've learned it also builds. Bridges, homes, and memories. And that's what I want to leave behind. Memories that house love." That week's headlines read, "Clara Montero donates fortune to support elderly women." Justice as legacy, businesswoman turns pain into purpose. That night, I sat alone in the garden of the foundation's headquarters. The breeze was gentle, the flowers swayed as if whispering thank you. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom, I did it. I taught what you taught me. But in the silence, the world understands." I closed my eyes and let time hold me. There was no more pain, no pride left to defend, only peace. Months passed after the donation. The world kept spinning, but inside me, everything was still, at peace. The foundation flourished. New units, new faces, new stories. Women who once walked with their heads down now moved through the hallways standing tall. I loved watching them from the second-floor windows. Seeing a woman reclaim her dignity is like watching a sunrise after a long night. The light arrives slowly, but when it does, it changes everything. Regina now coordinated a social reintegration project. Eduardo and Camila were expecting their first child, and I, at last, felt whole. Not because I had won, but because I had learned to let time win for me. One afternoon, while organizing papers in my office, I found an old hand mirror. The same one I had used years ago, on that disastrous dinner night. I looked at my reflection. Silver strands, wrinkles, serene eyes. There was no pain left there. The humiliation that once wounded me had become a memory polished by wisdom. I picked up a pen and wrote on the back of the mirror, "Silence is the answer of women who already know their own worth." I left it on my desk beside a photo of Eduardo as a little boy. I smiled, realizing that life always rewards those who don't rush to collect debts. As evening fell, I walked through the garden and watched the first lights come on inside the foundation building. Laughter echoed from within. And that's when I understood. The sound of happiness is quiet, but constant. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind. Vengeance fades, respect doesn't. I walked slowly toward the gate, my heart light. Time at last had closed its account. And if you've ever been humiliated, forgotten, or underestimated, remember this. Silence is not weakness. It's the pause before the turning point. Subscribe to the channel and join me to hear more stories of women who turned pain into dignity. Because respect is the one legacy no fortune can surpass.